To get things started, I would like to first introduce Councillor Ben Henderson, who's bringing greetings on behalf of Edmonton City Council. Ben is a three-term city councillor, a proven voice for Ward 8 communities. He's the VP for the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues. He's an advocate for the arts, has a 25-year career as theater company director, and is a trained mediator and negotiator, which shows up in some of his work in council. Ben sits on many committees and is a member of many organizations, the Community Engagement Initiative he's definitely a very big part of. He holds an MFA from the University of Alberta. Without more blah blah, he deserves a lot more attention than that, but I'd please give a warm welcome to Councillor Ben Henderson.
The one other thing that actually would be worth adding that I may speak about really briefly is I also chair right now and have for the last 4 years the Green Municipal Fund, which is a federal fund. We're now actually, we just were given another $1 billion in the last budget, which has been a tool to allow, through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, to revolve through grants and revolving loans, low-cost loans, to be able to help municipalities on sustainability projects, not just around energy, but also water, wastewater planning, transportation. So and there's like one of the new programs I may just speak about really briefly because I think it touches on this, which is what the extra $1 billion are for. So it's now a $1.7 billion fund, which is not insignificant. So I wanted to talk, and as well as bringing greetings, I think part of what I was being asked to do was get a little bit of context for where the City of Edmonton's at right now. I know we're going to have people that have way more expertise than I coming up afterwards on our specific programs. But I think we're at a particularly interesting time right now in terms of the city, and a challenging time and hopefully an exciting time, although we're a little bit shell-shocked with the budget today, and I honestly don't know what kind of implications that's going to have for some of the stuff I talk about. We really haven't had a chance to think about it, but cities in Edmonton in particular took a big hit today, and I don't know what implications that will have for some of this. So we've had our energy transition strategy in place now for 4 years, I think. And we had certain goals that were set into that, and there's a number of programs that are well underway on that. We also last year, when we had the International Panel on Climate Change conference here on cities and the environment, committed to something called the Edmonton Declaration, which was our commitment with now I think cities all over North America and actually internationally to sign on to saying that we would do what we need to do with good scientific understanding to reach the 1.5 goals that were set out in the Paris COP21 agreements. So that is our commitment, and we all signed on to it. We moved it around the world, and then we felt we had to go back and make sure that the plan that we had in place actually got us there. And I don't think it was a huge surprise to find out that it didn't, and that we really needed to up our game if we were going to get to 1.5. And we asked them as well to do something called a carbon budget, which actually began to look at how much, if we were going to get to 1.5, how much carbon we still had left to expend, I suppose, if you want to think about it that way, or save, before we would blow irrevocably past ever meeting that 1.5 target. And if we kept on going on our businesses, not our business as usual strategy, even on the strategy we'd worked out and committed to, what became clear, not surprising but still alarming, was that we blew through our carbon budget in 8 years. So it was really obvious at that point that we had to do a rethink, and we're in the process of doing that right now. We sent administration back. We have said that everything now will come forward to council with the context of that carbon budget, both operating and capital, so we'll be able to track both where we're gaining and where we're losing. And I think that'll be a game changer for the city, and hopefully mean that we're not sitting here in 10 years or in 15 years going, oops, we missed our targets again. But it's not going to be simple getting there. And what became really clear in what we were doing was there was no magic wand answer. It was all the answers. We needed all the pieces of the puzzle. There's no one thing that is going to get us to those targets. And it's one thing to get the city operations there, but I think it's not simple but doable. It's a much bigger challenge to get us as a community to that 1.5 target. And I think that's where the work that you guys will be talking about today comes in, because this becomes, renewable energy becomes, it's not the magic wand answer to getting the whole city to 1.5. But it is a major piece of the puzzle that we have to find ways as a city, all of us collectively, to be able to do all the things we need to do to make sure that we are not blowing through that budget in 8 years, and that in actual fact we can get ourselves to a net zero state by 2050 and where we have to get to by 2030, which are the targets we set for ourselves. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. There are some things that around solar that are well underway. The city itself, in as much as a kind of leadership piece as anything else, has made a commitment to go totally renewable on all of our electricity use, I hope by next year. We're still working out some of the agreements on that. So there's, as you all know, there's when you start to sort of go to that and making sure you do it in a way that's honest and not just by buying RECs, that we can actually come up with the best way of doing that from a contracting point of view. So that's what's slowing us down a little bit. It's not the desire to get there. It's not necessarily even the resources to get there. It's making sure that we do it in a way that actually makes sense in terms of the long-term contracts for the city. We have, and I don't know what, this is one of those things we don't know what now will happen to it today, which is something we've been pushing for. We got the legislation through the previous government for what we best know as a PACE program, which probably many of you are familiar with, which essentially allows us allows people to do retrofits to their homes or businesses, or I think actually it could be applied to new builds as well. Essentially you can borrow money based on and pay it back over time out of basically your savings in your operating costs, and that we can link it to the property tax, so that if you sell your house, that debt transfers, and it leaves us very secure. It leaves the homeowner very secure in terms of knowing that the people that get the benefit and advantage of that are actually going to be able to. It'll be linked to the property. So we got the legislation through from the province to let us do that. We had hoped that they would administer it, but we'd prefer that they do the administration of it. But whether or not they're now going to be in a position to do that with some of the changes that I think that I've heard have just been announced today is an interesting question. We have said that we're prepared to pilot this. And that we're prepared to administer it, but the trouble is if we administer it, it's very hard to ramp it up later on to other parts of the province, because we clearly could only do the administration with the City of Edmonton. So how that plays out, I don't know. It's one of the pieces, a third of the money that came to the Green Municipal Fund was for PACE and other kind of innovative funding model kind of programs that municipalities could use to encourage homeowners and local businesses and other things to be able to do some of these projects. And I should say it's partly about renewable energy, but you can also use it for a retrofit of the home to actually minimize the amount of energy you're going to be using. Because I think actually that's a really big piece of the puzzle. There's part of it is about how we create our energy, but a major part of this is about how we don't use the energy to begin with. And that's hopefully will be part of this. So we're still really determined to get that PACE program going right away. I don't know how much it was just slowed down today by the budget, because we were waiting to hear what was going to happen, and I suspect it has made it more complex, not less complex, but we're pretty determined to get that program going quickly.
Let's give Councillor Henderson a big round of applause. If you would please join me in welcoming Lisa Dockman.
Yes, my name's Lisa Dockman, and you may have noticed the Change for Climate logo and on this slide and others. This is sort of the public-facing identity of our energy transition strategy, and it comes along with it's connected to our programs and our kind of online presence and behavior change campaigns. So as Councillor Henderson mentioned, our current strategy is the energy transition strategy. That I'm sure many of you have heard about. And it was approved in 2014 unanimously by the previous council, and then it took a couple years to get things in place, advisory councils set up, and programs have been implemented since about 3 years ago now, in alignment with this strategy. These are the three overarching targets within it. You'll see a GHG emissions reductions target, an energy efficiency target, and then a 10% local generation, so primarily solar generation target. we've launched and have in market programs targeting all of the different ways in which Edmontonians use energy. So it's a little bit hard to see there, but that graph shows that 16% of our energy use is from industry, 23% from commercial buildings, 19% from residential buildings, and 42% from transportation. So in order to achieve those goals, we have programs that are targeting each of these areas. Just to mention a few, we have the Corporate Climate Leaders Program there, and that one is working with businesses and organizations to manage and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and really supporting those that are committed to climate action in learning and engaging in that action. We also have, for the commercial sector, the Building Energy Benchmarking Program and Energy Audit Rebate. So this is for understanding and sharing the energy efficiency of large buildings in order to make that more accessible information to everyone in the market and start to transform to have energy efficient buildings more properly valued and having energy audits take place more often. On the residential side, we have the solar rebate program, which my colleague Leon will share a lot with you in a few moments. Another is the the home energy plan, which is delivered with Energy Efficiency Alberta. And this is a rebate program that supports home energy evaluations with a tool called EnerGuide, as well as the types of energy efficiency equipment and upgrades you might make, like home heating, insulation, windows, those kinds of things. And then lastly, that big transportation wedge, we have an electric vehicle strategy that was approved and are working on programming around that strategy, including things like installation of electric vehicle charging stations. While that is our current strategy, a lot has changed, as Councillor Henderson was speaking of, since that time. So I won't go into detail. He mentioned the Edmonton Declaration, which our council committed to, as well as many other cities in the world. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Paris Agreement, which found that the recommendation was, in order to not have total climatic destabilization, the recommendation from the best scientists that work with the IPCC is not to have the average global temperature increase to be greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in light of all of that, Council declared a climate emergency on August 27th, which happened to be at the same time as they were doing that investigation into whether our energy transition strategy was ambitious enough, and decided to send us to do more work to understand what would be necessary to achieve that 1.5 degree target in Edmonton and with Edmonton's carbon budget. The last piece here, the resource here, is the Deadline 2020. Significant to mention because it's a publication of the C40, a group of cities. Started as 40, but now it's many, many more that are globally committed to the Paris Agreement and are doing some really great work on understanding carbon budgeting and what is going to be necessary at that city level. And that is where we sort of all landed on this 1.5. And the question that we're all working with now is what is necessary in order to achieve a 1.5 degree target in Edmonton, and then we're bringing that as an updated energy transition strategy for Council's review. And I believe it was Q3 2020, that's the deadline for that, with quarterly reporting between now and then. So just a little bit more information. Councillor Henderson mentioned that 8 years, but I'll just speak briefly to this graph. So this graph has the top line being our current energy transition strategy, and then the middle and bottom ones being a 1.5 and a 2 degree scenario. So as you can see, the level of ambition needed to be raised in order to achieve those. So we did some modeling work that was shared with Council this summer as well on what might be necessary in order to achieve that. And the modeling came up with these 6 climate shifts, or kind of the areas where deep changes would be necessary. And then we were able to model what kinds of GHG savings we could anticipate within each of those areas. So that was presented to Council when they were making their decision. You'll notice there's tools and targets, low carbon city and zero emissions transportation, emissions neutral buildings, renewable revolution, so that's exceptionally relevant to this room today. A just and equitable transition, and then negative emissions. And this is a very high overview of that modeling and of the kinds of levers or actions within each of those climate shifts and how they would contribute to that lower carbon future. So you're not able to read that, but if you do go, the report is public, and I'm happy to share it with anybody if there's trouble finding it. But these are kind of the elements within each of those shifts that are expected to achieve that. And now what we're up to is really trying to understand what the program's policies, regulations, environment might be in order to achieve the changes modeled here. I think that's all that I have, but thank you.
Next, we have Leon Milner, also from the City of Edmonton, to tell us about the city's experience with supporting solar for its residents and the current program they are implementing right now.
I'll go through an overview of our historical programs. So this Nate reference array is the photo you're seeing here. Basically, it was to study the effects of snowfall on solar PV in Edmonton. It's an awesome project, and it basically showed that only a few % a year of your production is affected by the snow, so don't hurt yourself getting up there trying to shovel it off, all that stuff. We had a solar electric pilot program back in 2010. It was a small program, just $100,000 for residential, and same for commercial. We've been supporting Community League Solar, so there are 17 community leagues now that have put solar on our own city-owned facilities. We also have our sustainable building policy, so that has specific GHG targets for the buildings we're building, as well as renewables as a portion of the budget. We've had this MyHeat solar potential map, so Edmontonians can go on, look up their own address, and see the potential of their house for solar. It's a nice interactive tool. It's great for engagement. It also has links to finding installers. A quick recent history. So on April 15, 2017, there was the start of the Energy Efficiency Alberta rebate, which is province-wide, 75 cents per watt. Then in 2018, the city came out with a top-up for that program for Edmontonians, and that's just 15 cents per watt. Those two programs together would rebate about 40% of the cost of the solar install. EEA then increased that. Then in May of this year, the Energy Efficiency Alberta rebate ran out of money, and then in July of this year, at the end, we launched our new rebate, which is just 40 cents per watt. So I'm here to fill you in on more of the details about that. So our Change Homes for Climate solar program, as I mentioned, 40 cents per watt is typically about 15% off the cost of your install. The limits are $4,000 per house, or 40% of the cost. And for new home builders, we have a limit of just 5 homes per home builder per year. So how it works, there's a 2-part application. You do one part of it before the install. Typically, the solar installers can take care of all the paperwork for you. You get pre-approved, then you go through, do your install, and get the rebate. All the homes that are eligible, so single-family homes, you can do your roof, you can do your garage, townhomes, apartments, condos. So basically everything residential we're cool with. There have been not many systems for apartments and condos. It's a little more complicated, but we're very happy to support you, so please reach out. For consumer protection with the program, we're just requiring approved solar contractors. So basically that means that the solar contractor is a member of the Solar Energy Society of Alberta or of the Canadian Solar Industries Association, and they're listed on their website. What that does is when they've signed up to those organizations, they signed up to their code of conduct, and they're held accountable to their complaint and dispute resolution processes. So how do you participate? Typically the installers will take care of paperwork for you. So just hiring an installer is your main duty here. The Solar Energy Society has great resources on how to choose a solar provider. So I would just go to their website. You can print off the PDF of how to choose a solar provider. As with any contractor hiring, you want to do your due diligence, get multiple quotes, and go from there. You can also learn about solar using a lot of CISA's great resources. There's the Going Solar in Alberta guide. There are events like this. One thing I want to point out as well is the Facebook groups. So there are a whole bunch of Facebook groups. If you want to find installers or you don't know anyone who has solar yet, you can go on there. You can ask questions of people who already have solar or ask questions of installers. learn more about your electricity bills, learn about net zero homes, et cetera, et cetera. Learn about microgeneration regulation, fascinating stuff. So your step 2, then once you've hired an installer, is to work with your installer. So use handling the paperwork, understand their timelines. So the install process itself doesn't necessarily take that long. Things like interconnection might take longer. Just make sure your expectations are clear up front with your installer. I was talking to Rocky Farrow, an old advocate of solar, and she just says, don't overcomplicate it. It's like putting in a toaster. You should probably do a little more due diligence because it's a little more expensive than a toaster. But if there's an extreme case, just so you know, there is this consumer protection piece through Solar Alberta or the Canadian Solar Industries Association. So you can contact those organizations and have them help you in resolving disputes with their members. We have lawn signs as well. So one of the things we want to show off is that in Edmonton, 73% of Edmontonians from our surveys are concerned about climate change and agree that we must do more. We have to act now. So you're a normal person within Edmonton, show it off, get one of these signs, put it up on your lawn, start a conversation with your neighbor. If you're interested in the signs, just talk to your installer or contact us. So yeah, I'll go into a bit of data about our programs. So if you go to our website, you can see this graph. We update it every single month with the interconnected solar in Edmonton. So you can see the total capacity growing over time. We're about 11 megawatts or 12 megawatts right now. The bottom right shows the systems installed per month. So you can see this year has been a good year. And then there's just some more specific numbers. These might not be that interesting to you if you're new to solar, but been in the industry for a while, it might be very interesting. So these are just from the previous program that was stacked with EEA, so that $1.05 per watt. Not our new program, that's 40 cents a watt. We don't have a lot of numbers yet. But as you can see, the total investment in our community has been over $11 million just from this program. The installed capacity, about 4.5 megawatts and about 460 systems so far. The GHG savings, so these are over the lifetime of the system. So you install your solar system, it works for the next 30 years. That's the timeline we used, at least just for these numbers. It can work longer, obviously. So the lifetime GHG savings is about 60,000 tons so far, which is the equivalent of taking about 18,000 cars off the road for 1 year. And the average lifetime GHG reductions per home is about 142 tons. The average system size under the program has been about 7.4 kilowatts. The average total cost was about $20,000 before the rebate. After the rebate, it was about $12,000. And the average price per installed watt has been $2.77. And the average Edmonton incentive on that was $1,100. This is just a graph of all the systems that have been put in and the system sizes. So you can see most of the systems are between 5 and 10 kilowatts, which is what you would expect from your average home. And then some larger, some smaller, but there's a whole range of systems. So yeah, if you have any questions about this data, we keep it up, I maintain it, I can share it. So under our new program, we've had 90 applications so far, which is just in the last 2 months, about 10 installs completed. So it seems like a small number of installs, but that's also because the previous program's installs are still finishing. There were so many people interested before the cancellation of the provincial program. So they're still wrapping up, and then our program's just taking off. So we've had about 10 installs so far. And yeah, this doesn't include systems outside of the rebate, so if the new home builders, for example. And we don't really have enough results yet to share, but we'll keep updating it as we go on. And that's it for me.
We now have Justin Smith, who serves as Director of Clean Energy Financing at Energy Efficiency Alberta. Let's welcome Justin up to the podium.
I'm excited to chat to you tonight about the Clean Energy Improvement Program, also known as Property Assessed Clean Energy, or PACE. Councillor Henderson alluded to this program earlier, so I'm happy to delve into a little bit more detail on what the program's designed to do, how it was structured from a legislative and regulatory perspective here in Alberta, which is important to consider because it's a little bit different than some of the PACE programs we see in the United States. Go over some of the design details and hopefully provide an update on progress both with Edmonton and other municipalities across the province that are actually moving towards implementation. So for those of you who are not familiar with Energy Efficiency Alberta, we're a Crown corporation here in the province. created via legislation about 2.5 years ago. And our mandate is to really capture Alberta's energy efficiency potential. It's sort of a recognition that energy efficiency is oftentimes the cheapest energy resource available on a system. And in order to accelerate our carbon abatement goals, as well as stimulate the economy, create local job creation, and help homeowners and businesses save money, focusing on energy efficiency as a resource is an important part of that strategy, and that's what our agency is all about. So before talking about PACE too, I'll talk about us as an agency. Obviously, our first few years were focused predominantly on rebate and incentive programs that were designed to really see more widespread adoption of technologies and measures, both residentially and in the commercial and industrial sector, that we knew were cost effective, but the market just needed a little sweetener to see the level of adoption that we needed in order to achieve our carbon emissions reduction goals. Now, as many of you are well aware, some of those incentive and rebate programs have been pared back. Some of the provincial funding that have supported some of those programs has been reduced or canceled. That's not altogether bad news. Certainly we want to do more of that, and there's more capacity in this province to do those types of programs. And in some pockets of the market, those programs will continue. But we really see an opportunity to shift away from a predominantly rebate and incentive type model to a model that enables private sector finance to get off the sidelines and in the game as well, because these are positive NPV projects that have real economic value, both in the short term in some cases and the longer term in others. And as an agency, we want to do what we can to enable that shift so that we can continue to do the types of projects that save electricity and save homeowners and businesses money, but don't necessarily have to be funded full freight via tax dollars. And that's where financing programs come in. Let's talk about PACE. So PACE is a financing program that essentially leverages the security and the stability of the municipal property tax system in order to facilitate repayments, which allows money to flow to homeowners and businesses who need it at more accessible and affordable rates and over longer terms that make those monthly or annual repayments a little more manageable. And so given the fact that, as Councillor Henderson mentioned, the repayment obligation is secured by the property, the repayment vehicle is the property tax bill itself. These are like very entrenched systems of payment. The investment is viewed as highly secure, and therefore the cost of capital is lower, and in some cases the underwriting criteria as well as the term of the loan can be relaxed or extended in ways that make it more manageable and more affordable for your average homeowner or small business owner. So that's what PACE is all about. Some of the other benefits, obviously utility bill savings, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, those long amortization periods that I mentioned. Councillor Henderson also mentioned transferability. That's an important aspect because, you know, especially in solar, you're looking at a useful life that can stretch to 20 years, in some cases potentially longer. Oftentimes a resident is going to change homes 6, 8, 10 years, and ensuring that the homeowner or the business owner that's benefiting from the renewable energy that's created or the energy efficiency gains that are captured as a result of some of our projects, ensuring that the obligation to pay for that remains with the person benefiting is what PACE is all about. It's just a more efficient way to set up the system. I should also mention that the way that our legislation is structured makes every part of this 100% voluntary, from the local government that chooses to opt in to the homeowner that chooses to actually do a project. Nothing about this is mandatory, and nothing about the fact that Alberta has this suggests that your property taxes are going to go up. You have to choose to do this if it makes sense for you, and that's a very good feature. PACE has been wildly successful in the U.S. Some of the early adopting states, New York, California, some states in the Midwest, passed PACE enabling legislation in 2008, 2009, around then. Since then, they've had about $5 billion on the residential side in cumulative PACE financing. about 60% energy efficiency, 40% renewable energy. There's a bit of double counting in those numbers because oftentimes we'll see projects or PACE finance projects do both. And on the commercial side, quite successful as well, especially in Connecticut, which has a really interesting model and an efficient program administrator doing almost $1 billion in commercial PACE financing as well. So a very successful program south of the border, and something we're looking obviously to replicate here up north. Nova Scotia pursued a PACE-type model in 2010. Halifax has a Solar City program that's sort of based on a PACE-like model. We haven't seen the project volumes that we would like to see out of Halifax's program. Ontario and Toronto in particular have also pursued this, and while it's taken a bit of time, as you see, their statute was passed in 2012. They're starting to gain some traction in the marketplace. They're looking to exceed 1,000 applications in the 2020 calendar year, and they expect about $20 million in financing since the opening that program. So again, not the frenetic pace of financing that we're hoping to see here in Alberta, but certainly gaining some traction, and we're happy to see that. So the legislation was actually passed in June of 2018, and it makes amendments to the Municipal Government Act, which is the statute that governs a lot of municipal governance, taxation, those sorts of things. And what it does is really piggyback off existing municipal law that allows municipal governments to levy property tax surcharges like a local improvement charge for a streetscape improvement or a back laneway paving, those types of things, but doing it for an individual home or an individual property. So it's not too different from the mechanics that already are there, but it's about doing it for a single property and doing it for the benefit of the environment. It's complemented by a regulation as well, which goes into a lot of the details around how the program's structured, things like eligibility, things like maximum financing amounts, other components of the program, like how the qualified contractor network that EEA oversees can be leveraged to support installations, as well as some consumer protection measures. So I'll just quickly touch on some of those eligibility criteria and then talk about progress to date. So in order to be eligible, the municipality in which the property is located has had to have opted into the program. The person or persons applying must be the legal owners of the property. We're working with municipalities on different tests and underwriting criteria, but a baseline test under the legislation and regulation is that you have to be current on your property taxes. We're certainly not going to add a levy if you're showing any indication that you're struggling to make those payments, at least currently. And the same with any debt that's tied to that property. So typically, a mortgage obligation. Want to make sure that you're current on all of that. As far as property eligibility, our PACE legislation casts quite a wide net, which is good. So we touch the residential and the commercial market, including single-family homes, commercial office building, retail businesses, data centers and warehouses, multifamily residential buildings. We see PACE is very applicable in the tourism and hospitality space. So our municipal partners in Canmore and Banff and some other locations across the province are quite interested in kind of upgrading their hospitality building stock. So we're excited about that. Really the only limitation is it can't be a government-owned property, a municipal facility or a provincial government facility. In many cases, those aren't paying property tax to begin with, and so it doesn't work. On that point, though, I will say the nonprofit sector is also quite interested in PACE, and they tend to be very good clients for PACE too. So they've got lumpy cash flows, they've got an aging kind of building stock, and PACE financing can be quite supportive for them in getting the money they need to make energy efficiency and renewable energy upgrades. While they aren't subject to property tax, there is a method by which to assess a PACE charge to that property, and so they are eligible for the program. And then we also cast quite a wide net in terms of the various projects that are eligible. So energy efficiency and renewable energy. There's a raft of different technologies and measures on our eligible products list that we maintain at Energy Efficiency Alberta that would qualify. Under the terms of the legislation, there are maximums. So on the residential side, it's up to $50,000, non-resi $1 million, and designated farmland $300,000. Those are the maximums, but what's more important is your existing property tax. In terms of the regulation, you can't pursue a PACE project that is going to more than double your existing property tax payment on an annual basis. And so that's typically the ceiling that's triggered first before we begin to approach the $50,000 or the $1 million on a commercial space. So a couple of final things. So consumer protection measures are quite important and something that we're taking quite seriously. There have been reports in the U.S. that, once a PACE enabling statute is passed and once, the contractor network is pushing some of their customers to utilize PACE financing to do projects, in some cases, what we want to avoid is, pushing PACE as a financing tool on unsuspecting homeowners that don't necessarily understand how the program's designed to work, or what, having a property tax assessment on your home means in terms of, not making those payments and putting your home up, as the risk of losing your home. Certainly, we've designed a program where those things will be few and far between, if ever. But it's important to make sure that contractors, homeowners, and all PACE stakeholders really understand what this is. It is a form of borrowing, and to understand how to do so responsibly is important. That's the end of my formal slides. I will just comment on an update. So we've constituted, as soon as the legislation was complete, we constituted a municipal advisory council. There's representatives from about 10 municipalities across the province who've demonstrated a real keen interest in adopting PACE locally. Edmonton was obviously got a seat at that table, as well as Calgary and many others. Now, we had hoped that Edmonton would be an early adopter and they would jump on this. And the intention was to run a pilot with the City of Edmonton. And I'll say this as a friend and someone who is professionally vested in Edmonton's success when it comes to their transition strategy. But on PACE, you guys are moving just a little bit too slow. There's a bylaw and a contract sitting with administration right now that could be adopted at your next council meeting, and you can make this program available January 2020. The issue of who's going to administer it and the political uncertainty, and I understand and sympathize with that, but the reality is the enabling legislation in Alberta allows either a municipality to administer the program on their own or to do so with Energy Efficiency Alberta. Now, we think doing so with us makes a lot of sense, capture economies of scale, work with a pre-established contractor network that's province-wide, things of that nature. But there's nothing to stop Edmonton from pursuing this on their own. And if that's something they choose to do, that's something that we would encourage them to do. But dithering about who's going to administer the program is not something that we have time to do. And I would encourage council and I'd encourage administration to move just a little faster, because this is something that has real value. So with that said, I look forward to your questions later on. Thank you very much.
I want to introduce Anton Bellot from ATB.
Today, we've heard a lot about what's happened with, between EEA, the City of Edmonton, and what's happening on the renewables / the solar energy side. Today, I want to focus on what ATB's done so far in this space, some of the programs we have available today, and then kind of where the future is going to look towards us as the industry continues. So before I kind of get into my presentation, just a show of hands, how many people are interested from a solar perspective for, whether installing on your home or from a residential perspective? Okay, that's most of you. Anyone interested from an agricultural perspective? Any farmers in the building today? Okay, great. And then any business owners or anything related to commercial? Okay, all right. So we'll go over, basically we have three or four different types of programs that we do offer here today at ATB Financial. We do focus on the residential side. We do small business and commercial / corporate. That also includes our nonprofit space as well. And then we also do support a lot of our agricultural clients as well for financing. So for the residential financing piece, and a lot of you guys probably really want to dive and see what we offer here as of today for this slide. So with us, I will go with the program, what we have currently outstanding for a lot of our residential customers, and then at the end I'll explain how it works. If you're interested, how would you go through about that? So with ATB, we'll definitely help you look with that to help with that transition. So we do have two different types of things we offer. An unsecured linked line of credit, that'll be a prime plus 2. For some of those, those who are interested what prime is at today, it's 3.95%. So just to give you some numbers there. That's one option that we do have for our residential community and residential clients. If that's not a good option for you, then option 2, what we be called a time plan personal loan, just basically a simple personal loan. We offer 5, 10, or 15-year amortizations, right, to spread that out amongst the years to try to lower your payments. And again, everything is at prime plus 2. For this, we only offer on the variable rate. We do not offer fixed at this point for now. We are looking to continue to adopt that, but for now it is offered on a variable rate. For our loan farmer and for a loan person who likes agriculture here, we do offer a lot of agriculture financing. So we do offer up to $100,000. So we look at that at two different ways. If you're over $25,000 and above, we'll go at prime plus 1. If you are going to be on a smaller project at $25,000 and less, it will be a prime plus 2. Amortization for those types of loans and everything else are going to be about 15 years. We do have for fixed rate for some of our agricultural clients just on the longer terms and how that would pay back and how the structures would look. Bigger slide, I'll go into a little bit of depth here. So for us on the small business side, we do offer 3 different types of options for our small business clients. I'm going to start from right to left, actually. So the small project financing, we consider small project anything for our small business $50K and under. We will do a prime plus 2 up to a 5-year amortization. The reason we can't really look to do that any further is because at that size for $50,000, just based on from what we've seen so far, 5 years and at $50,000, the payments aren't too bad in that regards, and it's very hard just within our current environment today to offer anything more on an unsecured basis. So 50,000 is usually the mark we'll look at. If it makes sense sometimes to go up to 100, but it all depends on a case-by-case scenario. The other 2 programs kind of go hand in hand. So the CSBFA program, and that stands for the Canadian Small Business Financing Program, that's a loan with a government guarantee behind it. So interest rate for that is prime plus 3. We do go amortizations up to 10 years with a potential to finance potentially up to 100% of the program. We do have a government guarantee from the federal government, from Industry Canada, at 85%. So it allows us to have a lot more flexibility when we're financing different types of projects, especially on the solar space. And then depending on that, the other option behind that would be our specialized customized solar financing program for our small business owners. We'll do prime plus 2. We can do either variable or fixed rate, 1 to 5 year terms. And then amortization is still at up to 10 years and up to about 75% loan to value. But we do not have a financing limit versus the Canadian Small Business Financing Loan. So if we want to do a $1.1 million project, that's something we can definitely take a look at for sure. Corporate and some of our bigger, smaller commercial guys, what we do is we do it on a case-by-case basis. A lot of times when we're looking at these stuff about $5 million and over, we're looking at it from a project finance perspective on a non-recourse base. So a lot of it will be on a lot of the utility projects we mentioned earlier, based on NPV, on the cash flows that are going to be on the cost savings from that project. We'll look to put together a custom package in regards to how the cash flow is made and how we can look to leverage with our corporate finance team and maybe potentially even capital markets, depending on the type of deal and depending on the type of structure, where it's located, and everything like that. Again, it's very case-by-case basis. Right, as the industry continues to evolve, right, the financing and the programs will also continue to evolve as well. That's one thing that we made very certain for us as part of the program. As everything continues to grow within the province and a lot more things within solar decide to slowly start to pick up, the program will evolve with the demands and needs with a lot of the clientele. Nonprofits is always one we always want to finance. Now, the last slide there in cash security requirements, that one's wrong. I wanted to change that, but I didn't have time to do that. Apologies on that. But we will look at, from a security standpoint, a mix of the cash reserves that are on hand with the nonprofit and then the other security attached to it. So if they own the building and everything else like that, to try to tack on to that. Again, it's a super case-by-case basis because every nonprofit is in a different scenario and a different financial situation. So what we look at is to take a look at their position right now and the cost savings that the solar project they would like to take on, what those cost-saving synergies would be to put together a custom solution based on that. Kind of going into we've kind of talked a little bit more about what we currently have, but how do we want to do it? If you were interested, how would we look at it? So ATB has a approved list of solar vendors / contractors that you can look at. We give a lot of these vendors, approved marketing brochures and everything at free of cost to help with a lot of our partners out there in the industry to make sure we can continue to educate and continue to push a lot of things to help invigorate a lot of things with the solar space. We do vet all of our solar vendors. I know there's been a big concern from some stories in the US and everything else like that in terms of, how can I trust this solar vendor if they're going to make sure they're not going to completely mess up my installation and then cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we go through a pretty intense vetting process, and then they must be a member of Solar Alberta. So not only do we go through our own vetting process, it's almost like a second eyes versus Solar Alberta as well. So going through the program and then going through that certain solar that was with ATB is a pretty safe bet. How it would work, both residential and our agricultural groups would really look the same. As mentioned before, a lot of the installers and the vendors, they do a lot of the paperwork really for you. They will work with us on the back end from a commercial credit standpoint, or residential and agricultural credit standpoint, to send that application in. That'll come into our back office, and that'll be working with a lender on the back end to get you approved for your financing with us on the agricultural side or on the residential side. For business and commercial, as you've probably seen from the other slides previously, it's super case by case. So we can't just look at it and say, hey, you check this, and this box. We can provide financing for you. We will have everything come. We'll still talk to the solar vendors. They'll eventually send everything off to us, and you'll work with one of our relationship managers, someone like myself, to go through your financials, go through your position. How is this going to help from a cost savings synergy perspective, and what's the best solution there for you? Again, commercial has been one of those areas that is always evolving and is just not as, there's a lot of different dynamics versus our residential and agricultural clients. Just some quick things in terms of timelines, expectations. Retail is for our residential clients, it's pretty quick, 5 to 6 days from the moment we get everything from the solar vendors. Agriculture and commercial will take a little bit longer because with ag and farmland financing and a lot of the other pieces, it takes a little bit more due diligence. Corporate and commercial especially will take a little bit longer because the reason for that is we want to have a custom solution for each individual. We can look at 4 different manufacturers that all want to do solar, but every deal will be structured differently just based on their needs at that point. ATB also does energy efficiency as well. So leasehold improvements, HVAC, LED lighting, everything. 10-year amortization, prime +3, that's what we'll look to do. If you do own your space, we can go up to $1 million under some of our program here. And if it is a lease space, the maximum under that program will be $350,000. A couple other things that ATB looks to offer, and again, we'll look forward for the Q&A, but our mortgage loan insurance refund, so you can look to get a little bit of a refund from the insurance premium if the mortgage is uninsured. Preferred mortgage rate if you're doing home renovations to meet energy efficiency standards, we can offer a preferred mortgage rate. I know during the other presentation we also had some stuff with changing to electric cars and more energy efficient cars, so we can look at an interest rate discount for a lot of our residential and our personal clients. And then we've also changed our MasterCards recently to more eco-friendly MasterCards, and then you can choose to donate those rewards to eco-friendly charities as well. I'll blow through this one a little bit quicker, but alternative financing options. Not only Energy Efficiency Alberta should also be on there. Sorry, Justin, but that's okay. So we have Energy Efficiency Alberta. We went through PACE. That's also an option for you guys. Alberta Indian Investment Corporations. We do a lot of work with our First Nations or Indigenous, and we've worked with them over the past to see how else we can help all Albertans get some alternative financing. Futurepreneur is also a good option as well that we can take a look at. Everyone, as soon as they hear from a bank, they're always like, hey, what's the rates? Here's the thing. So I'm expecting a lot of those. Alberta Women's Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, that's another program that we can also look at, specifically supporting our women entrepreneurs here in the province and community futures. Just as a note for a lot of the alternative financing things that you do see here, it's not always sometimes a choice of one or the other. Everything from an alternative financing perspective, and in my experience, we've looked at partnering with some of these different alternative financing programs to say if ATB can't get you the full amount, but let's say, for example, Futurepreneur can come in for a little bit more and doing like a co-lend in that regard. So it's not always has to be one or the other. There's multiple options, and sometimes it's always about the options just talking with one another to understand how can we get this done. Contact information. So it's myself, Renice Masick, who couldn't make it here tonight. She's the Edmonton contact here as well. But for anything else for us, if you have any questions in terms of solar or anything renewable energy, solarforbusiness@atb.com. That's it. I am done blabbing for the evening.
To round out our lineup of speakers, Chris Kosowski.
Hopefully you've learned that like financing this project is easier than you thought, right? And it's going to cost you less than you thought. Right? And the cool thing about putting solar on your roof is like, anyway, so I'm here to talk about like once you're set up and talk about your power bills, right? When you're choosing your electricity rates, like choosing your power bill. And so the cool thing about having solar on your roof is like once it's on there, then it's producing right away and your bills are lower right away, right? That's me, Park Power LTD on social media, parkpower.ca. We're going to go through once you have your solar on your roof or once you're getting to that point, you should think about the rates you're choosing for your electricity bills because it will matter as far as how much you're earning and what your payback is from your system. Just a little spiel. It was alluded to, like I'm a solar advocate, right? And there is growth in the solar, I call it the sun patch. So there's growth in solar field in Alberta, right? Like it's still a small portion of the whole grid, but it's growing. And at Park Power, I saw a great opportunity to support that growth while providing a great market option for consumers. So how does your solar PV earn money? So once it's up there, besides like the reduction in your usage, your system has the ability to earn for you, perhaps, right? And so in Alberta, we call it net billing, and some other regions they call it net metering. I refer to it as net metering a lot of time. But essentially what it is that like when your system is producing and it comes down to your house and you're producing during the day and the draw from your house is very minimal, right? Whatever, your house will use what it can and then the rest gets pushed out onto the grid. And so we have legislation in Alberta that says when you're pushing power out on the grid, you should be compensated for that power. Does that make sense with everybody? So this is sort of the gist of it, right? So that 6.8 cents is an average, right? It was the price cap rate. The price cap's going away, but just to give you sort of an average market rate as far as retailers like me that are out in the market trying to get customers what they're offering, right? So 6 to 7 cents. So when you're drawing off the grid at nighttime, you're going to be paying 6.8 cents. When you're selling to the grid during the daytime, that house will only be selling for 6.8 cents, okay? Why your rate choice matters. The rate choice matters. The rate choice you have is, the language of the legislation says, the rate is agreed upon between the customer and the retailer, right? Generally, it's the same rate you're purchasing at, right? Administratively, it's very simple that when you're buying for 6.8 cents, when you're buying off the grid, you're going to sell at that same rate, right? And so when everybody looks at their bill, you see there's generally a top portion that's your usage and a bottom portion is your delivery and other related charges, right? And so when you become a solar PV and become a microgenerator, you have another line item on your bill that says microgen credit. So it goes in, and it goes credit against your whole bill, right? So that bottom portion of the bill that everybody complains about, you're not using a lot of power, but your transmission and delivery charges are a lot. Well, putting solar in the roof is going to help reduce that, right? So the Solar Club. So your rate choice matters. So Park Power offers a great rate option for people with solar PV on their house, right? And so especially if you're a consumer where in the summer months you're producing more than you're using, right? So you would be generally earning a microgen credit for the power you're pushing out onto the grid because you're producing lots, but your house isn't using much, right? So what we do is we kind of take advantage of that net metering legislation. We game it a little bit, right? So 18.95 cents is the rate. So to buy off the grid for my usage, if I didn't have solar in my house, to pay like almost 19 cents would be 3 times the market rate, right? But think about that when you're trying to sell to the grid. Instead of selling at 60 cents, you're selling the market rate, you're selling for 3 times that rate, right? And so it makes a difference. And we have the option of like, for our customers to have the ability to switch between a high export rate and a low export rate. So when everybody's keeping track of their system. In the summer months when their system is in that high export range, where they're pushing out more to the grid than they are drawing, on a net basis, then it's advantageous to be at the high rate. Come this time of year now, like fall, when the production's down, they're going to switch over to a low export rate, which is a reasonable market rate, so that when they're in that, not in that net positive, they're drawing off the grid, they're paying a reasonable rate for power. Make sense? You are still producing in the winter, right? And as Leon like alluded to that Nate study, you know, like snow takes away, like, you know, it's 10% at max, right? It's a small amount of power that you use in the winter. But does that rate structure make sense, everybody? There's 2 options, right? So I have a couple examples. So these are Park Power customers that have solar on their roof. One is this one particular, so a big producer, and the other one's just more of an average one, right? So here we have there's a home builder in town and built a really efficient home and then put 98 panels on his property, right? So he has a 25 kW system, whereas like Leon was saying, like more like 5 to 10 kW is average size, right? So he's got a big system, right? But some advantages. So we have I have year-to-date numbers. So January to September, 9 months, he's pushed 18,000 kilowatt hours out onto the grid. 12,000 kilowatt hours draw from the grid is the average for an Alberta house, right? So he's pushing a lot out onto the grid. His average rate, because he was in the wintertime and summertime, but his average rate was 18 cents, right? And so we credited him for $3,400 of microgen credit against his bill, right? If he was on the 6.8 cents, just that sort of market rate, he would have only earned $1,277, so $1,300, right? So by being on a great rate example for this guy, he earned like, in just 9 months, he's already earned $2,100 extra dollars, right, on his system. So that helps when you're financing it, but like, you know, it's going to help those numbers. So this example, a more average home, right? So an average home, you know, in that sort of 800 to 1,200 kilowatt hours draw from the grid without solar on the roof. They put on 16 panels, just started producing in April, so we've only got 6 months of production here. But in 6 months, pushed out 2,800 kilowatt hours, was on that higher rate, earned $527 in those 6 months. Again, if he was just on the market rate, it would have only been $191, right? So we like an extra $300 just for making the right choice as a consumer. Just some other things as far as the Solar Club goes. So Park Power, there's a few other retail options that are offering this Solar Club, right? Placed around various places of Alberta. But we're not the big retailers, right? So we're small, we're independent, we offer great service, we offer a good product, and for solar people, solar on your roof, even better. So some extra benefits is that ability to switch between the high and the low rates, right? We're not going to charge you, it's part of the job, it's all good. The province still has that goal of up to 30% renewable by 2030, right? And so we're trying to help that, along with sort of offering this great product to the solar customers. We're playing into the REC market, so renewable energy certificates, right? So for all the energy that a customer will draw off the grid, we're going to purchase RECs to offset 30% of that usage, right, as a benefit to the whole, to offer that secondary value to renewable energy producers, right? And then for the customers, anytime you are drawing off the grid, just a cashback option, 2%, just another little benefit to say, hey, please use us. The question was the average price of power that somebody would pay buying the REC. So that's maybe referring to like an all-in rate where you're saying by buying this rate, I'm greening X amount of percent. So good question. We offer green offsets, but it's not an integrated price. So we say, here's what you're paying for the market, and then we charge, the offset charge is like, ours is like 1.66 cents, right? The other market rates would be, they're generally in that sort of, you're paying 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour extra to offset that. Answer your question? So, I mean, you'd be looking at the market rate, so to green 100% of your power, you'd be paying, instead of paying 6.8, you'd be paying like 8.8 or 9.8. No, for the REC, so what he's talking about is the green product, or it's kind of like a bullfrog power, right? It's a conscious purchase. You're purchasing an offset. Somebody is producing renewable energy somewhere on the market, and they're selling those to the REC market, and then we charge you an extra charge to pay for that REC, is right. And so if you're selling, if you're purchasing the offset for the REC at 1.5 to 2 cents, right? It's a small charge, right? As opposed to you're an MG and you're going to sell to like whatever 6.8 at minimum to the grid. So the benefit is the ISO is a great body. So the ISO is backing this, right? So for all the MG credit that we're going to give to you, the ISO reimburses us. So the Alberta Electrical Systems Operator. So the balancing pool and the money that we'll pay backs it.
So just a quick one for all of you that I think might be of interest to everybody. How do your programs, your different financing programs that you've talked about, integrate and overlap with each other in terms of eligibility in particular? In other words, do any of the programs you've spoken to preclude folks from participating in any of the others?
No, not at all. As far as Park Power Solar Club, no. There's no preclusion. We'll happily take you, right? And I don't really see much overlap in the rest either, but I don't know. I guess that's for them to...
I think there is a lot of collaboration that has to happen amongst everyone that's on the stage. As I mentioned in my presentation before as well, like ATB can finance a lot of these things, but what if there's an addition that needs to be had there? Particularly going off on PACE, to understand how secure that is, to leverage into that, which myself and Energy Efficiency Alberta are continuing to look at. It adds in a layer of security to continue to make things more efficient and more better for the consumer. That's the majority of the clientele here. But I think there is definitely some overlap and some added synergies from everything you've really heard today, from representing the private sector, and then a lot of the government agencies. How can we work together from providing, that private capital, a little bit more certainty as we continue to evolve and finance these projects.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add to that is another financing program that we're looking to roll out into the marketplace is the Green Loan Guarantee Program. And we've actually been in conversations with Anton and his group at ATB around how a provincial guarantee, similar to the CSBFA program that he talked about in his presentation, which provides an 85% guarantee against any losses as a result of default. The government of Alberta is prepared to provide a 50% guarantee on lending for eligible energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean technology investments. In particular, for the investments that where the technology is a bit more cutting edge, where the risk on the private side is just a little too high to be able to flow financing terms that are accessible and affordable to the borrower. Something like a guarantee can really help kind of get them over the edge and get them in the financing that they need. So that's another area of collaboration that I think will be pretty fruitful in the clean energy financing space.
Yeah, with the city programs, you can do the rebate and partner with financing as well. That's fine.
Yeah, and I just thought I might add, because we're very lucky to have a lot of best practices around how PACE programs align with incentive programs, especially in the United States. A PACE agency like Energy Efficiency Alberta is named as in our legislation, sort of helps go through that whole process from the contractor to quote getting to finding those incentives, because I think a lot of times the incentive market is changing so much that they end up being an expert in accessing all of those different incentives, rebates, and then also even alternative financing and whatnot. So PACE is really necessary for the kinds of changes that we need in Edmonton, and matches really nicely with all the incentive programs that we have.
I got two questions, but I'll go with the one that's a little more applicable to this area. Question on have any issues with solar programs with, for example, condos or townhouses, and say any problems you've seen in people finding working with condo boards and whatnot, or any issues that you and your programs would have with working with someone in that sort of situation?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the city, we're definitely open to working with different residential properties. Sometimes it gets complicated in terms of if you want to put it on your own condo, but does your condo board allow you to do that? Is it net meter, or sorry, is it individually metered versus not, like all these sort of issues? So it's really, I think, a case-by-case basis. But we're happy to help if you have questions about your specific case. And then I think the only system we've seen come through so far for a condo was powering the common spaces in the condo. So that's one approach. But yeah, we definitely want to support, not just one type of housing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll say what's interesting about that too, and where PACE can be quite helpful, is overcoming what in energy efficiency is called the split incentive. So you'll have a renter or a condominium owner in some cases who may be thinking about making an energy efficiency improvement or a renewable energy installation for whatever reason, but the benefits of a reduced utility bill or the microgeneration credit, for instance, don't accrue to them. It accrues to the condo board overall, and you've got to rely on them to flow that through to you in terms of lower condo fees or what have you. PACE, because the repayment obligations with the property tax itself, which is usually assessed unit by unit, allows the condo board to kind of give the thumbs up to that, knowing that if you're interested in it, it's going to save you money, but you're the one paying for it. And so it works in the commercial setting too. So it's just an example of what you're describing, where PACE can be quite applicable to some of the challenges that you're describing.
Sorry, just to add to that again, I think I've heard one concern about a restrictive covenant on a neighborhood that wasn't allowing anyone in the whole neighborhood to put solar on their building for aesthetic purposes and that sort of thing, so I would check on that.
My question is, what is the residence portion of that? Has that been quantified? Is that quantifiable? The concern I have is that with these escalating or the shortening timeline for reaching the target, residents don't have a clear understanding of whether or not the same old energy efficiency retrofits and changes that have been proposed by everybody for the last 30 years, if that's going to be sufficient to actually meet the target either. For example, can we still recommend high efficiency furnaces in an environment that might need to be a net zero situation at a residential level, every household throughout the city?
0.5 strategy. We don't have the results yet to share, but there will be a quarterly report going to council December 2nd, right? So you could look at that for a bit more clarity, but I would say before even looking at that, you can just look at the Paris Agreement, right? And what those targets are, and then extrapolate that down here. I mean, if we're getting to carbon neutrality by 2050, then that means net zero on everything, right? So.
Yeah, I guess I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't sufficiently clear. It's just that is the city taking a risk that it's making recommendations to residents that won't actually get them to where they need to be? A homeowner who invests in a high efficiency furnace to be told 5 years later that actually won't cover his share of the responsibility, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's what that activity was about, exploring those targets I shared with you and them being found to not be ambitious enough to reach the Paris Agreement. And I do think we're going to see just a whole nother level of understanding what's necessary and the kind of investments from individuals and different sectors and businesses in order to achieve that, to give council a full picture, at those quarterly reports. So of course on December 2nd will be a good time to see what's the outcome of that. But I did want to mention that there's, again, lots of really great examples. So the energy transition strategy is taking a market transformation approach, which, as you might know, includes education and awareness and incentives, but also importantly regulations. So we do anticipate there being recommended regulations as part of the process. That's part of what they're going through with that strategy. And anytime if there's going to be increased incentives and regulations, they're also, in order to be a just and equitable transition, like all of the modeling and the report talked about, there does need to be accommodation and incentives and supports for those who would be impacted by that. So there are all kinds of incentives for households under certain income levels, or households that need maybe the amount of greater supports to get to those levels of energy transition. So it is certainly something that we're very sensitive to, and is going to be, I think, a big part of what we put in front of council as the trade-offs, and for them to help make their decision.
Okay, my question is, as a contractor, when I got the paperwork today on some of the stuff with the City of Edmonton on the rebate program and that, why do you guys need to have so much information? Is where how much I pay for material, how much the homeowner's paying, how much profits I'm making, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of a little bit of private information for a business, and I don't know why the City of Edmonton or the ATB would need to know that kind of material. Could you explain to me why?
Is if there's specific data fields that you're filling out that you feel are not necessary or appropriate, if you could let us know which ones those are, because what likely is happening is when we design these programs, there's a lot of, it's very intentional what's being collected and why, and in order for us to make the best decisions around how to evolve the programs and whether they're being successful and whether they're helping us. So it's likely that there was an intent, and unfortunately neither of us, you know, I didn't design the program, but we could certainly check and make sure that that's being collected, like the purpose for which.
Yeah.
And then I would just ask you to take a peek, if you haven't already, at the sort of consent components of it, because it always is very clear on how your information will be used,
Yeah.
and limits to which it will be shared. Even internally, we have to be really clear about that within this.
And thank you. We really do appreciate the honesty, especially from us at the ATB perspective.
Yeah.
A couple things. First of all, to echo that sentiment, please provide that feedback and we can have a chat after. I'm happy to have that with you.
Yep.
Because part of the thing with our solar programs, both residential, agricultural, and commercial, they're continuing to evolve. And if something's not working, ATB is not going to say, no, this is how it is, hard stop. We want to make it easier for Albertans. We're an Alberta-based bank for Albertans to support Albertans today, tomorrow, and whatever the heck happens from a provincial level. I'm happy to have that feedback. The 2 points I do want to make from a security piece, because that sounds like that's the main concern. Obviously, in the digital age, there's a lot of things where it can happen. ATB has invested a lot of money into our systems, our CRM, into our security to allow to protect everyone's privacy and their data, per se, from yourself as a contractor, whether you bank with us or not, but then understanding some of the information that does come to our back end to support your customers for that financing. It's very secure, and I have a lot of confidence in that. However, no one's perfect. And, you know, we always want to take that feedback, and that's why for an Albertan to give us that feedback, we always take that very seriously, and we want to try to make the best changes that we can. So hopefully that's kind of giving you a little bit of more security, but also this thing that you've been heard and understand you've been listened to. Does that kind of clarify everything for you?
My question is, how will time for use affect financing and the rates given?
So time for use, I think, is what he's speaking of, is that like when you're being billed for your power, you're being billed on an hourly basis versus a billing period average basis. So, and you feel that time of use is coming to Alberta on a mass scale? Yeah, maybe. Like, so it's already in place for like larger commercial and industrial users, time of use, but for general residents like us, it's not the case, right? So, like, if time of use is a benefit to somebody with solar, because the price of electricity is more expensive during the day than it is at night, and when you're producing it's during the day, and when you're drawing it's at night, right? So as far as like for making it pay for the end user and for financing, like, that would be beneficial for a solar producer, right? I mean, I don't see it coming on mass scale just yet, but if it does, then it plays for solar, if that makes sense.
I live in half a duplex. I own it. And who among you is the most knowledgeable about setting up solar, all aspects of it, in duplex? Because there's a lot of ins and outs.
I would say, like, on a general basis, none of, like, some of us might have a good solar knowledge, but like if you're interested in putting it on your roof, like talk to Ben or Daniel or somebody at the Solar Energy Society, right? Like, you know, it's easily done for a duplex. You know, it's the wiring is not generally complicated. The capacities for a duplex is not generally complicated, right?
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about the issues involving two owners.
Sure.
And when the one owner moves on.
Yes.
And all that sort of stuff.
Sure. Like, well, that's a private property issue. Each owner has its own power meter, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So and then you're sharing the roof space, correct?
Yeah. Well, that would be the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, like, if you're sharing the roof space, then, you know, like, it's like to me the only issue comes up is when you have to replace the roof. The panels will be owned by you. The cost of installation will be owned by you. The microgen credit will be yours, right? The only issue will become is if there's repairs or replacement needs to be done on the roof, you have extra labor involved.
Okay, thank you.
I guess my question is about generation. There's the generation caps around 100% is what I kind of gather.
Yeah.
I guess what can you use if you're planning to, let's say, buy an EV So you're planning for your solar install, but you want to try and plan for that extra added load. Because I kind of get it's an average of the last X number of months.
Sure, I'll try. Sure. So like, yeah, I mean, you're talking about like designing your system because like generally you're supposed to design your system to match your usage capacity.
Right, because from what I understand, you can't essentially more than generate what you'd use.
You're right. The microgeneration regulation states that the system design is supposed to be for your usage capacity, right?
Right.
But like usage patterns can change, right? And so whether they're going to allow you to design a system for your usage pattern change, like yes, right? I don't think they've been like that aspect of allowing microgeneration maybe hasn't been enforced as it could be, right? You're right. The language is there, but like I think it should be reasonable to allow for usage pattern to change, right?
Okay.
Okay.
And I guess in the time frame before that, or as your system's in and you're on the way to getting an EV, is there some kind of, like if you were to, let's say, produce more than your bills were, what happens to that extra money? Does that come back to the owner, or
totally.
is that
it builds for us? It builds as a credit on your account. And then we have if it's more than $300, we'll give you a payment credit. But generally, it builds up as a credit as your account to pay off when your usage might increase through the winter.
Okay, and this I think will be our last.
Can I ask one just quickly?
Yeah, please, Lisa.
The gentleman who answered the question, does that count if it's a?
Yeah, there's two things going on in the economics of all this. One of them is you're trying to decrease your demand. And the other one is you're trying to switch everything over to electricity. And so you're, in a sense, trying to increase your demand at the same time. The ruling that they've, the way it was explained to me directly from the legislators is that you have to have significant proof of demand in order to be able to size your solar system to account for it. So if you're going to be upgrading your demand, increasing your demand over time, you may have to do several distinct solar installations to cover that increasing demand, is what has been explained to me.
So I actually just installed solar on my community league, and we were talking about this as well. And what a lot of people are doing, they're not just looking at solar usually, you're looking at energy efficiency as well. The best step to do it is do solar first while you're inefficient and you're needing to use a lot of power, and then as you save power, you start producing more. On the other side is if you do need to expand your solar system or you're planning to do that in the future, all you need to do is talk to your solar installer. It's very easy to do. You might pay a little bit more for certain components just because they need to be a higher capacity for later down the road, but adding panels is pretty foolproof and simple, and it's not complex.
This turns into a question for Justin. Part of the problem for us as people trying to access rebates and everything else like that is that we're only allowed to dip into that pool once. And yet we're trying to do the conscientious thing by shifting everything over to a form that a renewable energy can power, and we're being penalized in essence by the structure to address that. Is the province thinking of any way of helping those individuals with that kind of commitment? If I remember correctly, if I apply for a rebate, I can't apply for that rebate a second time. And the reason I would need to apply a second time is because I'm increasing load because I'm switching from natural gas to electricity or from gasoline to electricity.
Right. I think in those situations, like our program design contemplates situations as you're describing and would allow for a second rebate application. We treat it as distinct. What we're trying to avoid is someone double dipping. So there's sort of like baseline program design criteria that I guess would discourage duplicate applications or similar applications for the same investment or the same measure or the same project. But if there's kind of verifiable evidence that it's distinct, it's additive, you're going above and beyond what was done under the first stream, we would consider that. But I'm happy to probe a little deeper with our program design folks just to make sure that what I've said is accurate. But
I'd appreciate that. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
It's a really interesting point. I just want to thank once again each of you for coming in and enlightening us. Let's give these guys one more big round of applause.